Hair seems like a very complicated thing to render, and it can be, but with a little care and the right brush, it becomes a real easy task in Photoshop. I'm going to show you a few of the people that make up the scene in Times Square. Start off with my daughter here, my daughter Erica, and you can see the hair. I'm going to come in a little closer so you can see some of the kind of strands of hair that make up her little coif over here. You can also see that there are small hairs, the eyelashes and eyebrows, and all the different parts that make up the hair. We'll go in with my friend Colleen, and you can see another sets of waves going in all different directions and so on. Now, she has less detail because she's actually much smaller in the scene. The size of the person would determine how much detail I would put in because most of it would end up getting lost. There's another main character, which is Carla, my son's girlfriend. And again, we can see all the different strands of hair and eyebrows and so on that make this up. And then there's people who are somewhat more complicated, like my good friend Jeff Shewy, photographer out of Chicago. He's hiding most of his head hair, thank God, but look at his beard. Pretty involved beard. So let's look at how the hair was created using Photoshop brushes. So the hair pretty much starts out by creating a brush that's going to be very specific for creating the hair. Now, there are various brushes that I will create to do a single head of hair, starting from a group of strands of hair to fill up deep areas, getting to smaller groups of hairs for finer details, going down to a single hair for the little wisps and the little light hairs that are just kind of blowing in the wind and so on, like in the case of Jeff's beard. Most of that beard was done with single pixel brushes. Let's go in here and create the first of the strands of hair. I'm going to start with black because, as I said before, black will determine that the brush tip will be completely opaque. And I'll choose a hard edge brush like this one, and I'll bring the size considerably down to about 4 points. And I'm going to go in here and I'm tapping. Now, I have a pressure sensitive tablet, so you can see that they're coming out with different sizes, big one and some smaller ones. I can even make the brush even smaller and just make a couple of little tiny dots right in between there. That is a good clump of hair. I'm going to select that group right there and define brush preset. And we're going to call this hair 1. So now right off to the side here, I'm going to create another little group of about 5 little hairs. These are small. I'm going to create that. I'm going to say brush preset, and we'll call this one hair 2. All right, so now we can dump them. We don't need them anymore. Everything's fine. So now, here's the way the hair was structured. I'm going to go in here and create a layer. I'm going to call this layer the base. This is the base of the hair. Now, I'll pick a color that I want that base to be. So I'm going to say it's going to be a brown hair. So I'm going to pick a nice dark brown like this. And I'm going to go in here and with my brush, and a nice soft edge brush rather, and a nice size, I'm going to go in there and start to kind of draw in the basic shape where the hair is going to go. Now, that's just a background. On top of this, I'm going to start to build the hair. Now, I'm going to start off with some dark hairs. So I'm going to pick a much darker version of that brown, and I'm going to pick the first of the hairbrushes, that one, the one that's pretty dense, which right now is going to do that. So I'm going to go into my brush panel, and right off the bat, I'm going to go to brush tip shape and say, reduce the spacing down to 1%, which makes it solid lines, just like that. And you can see what's starting to happen. I'm also going to go down here to my transfer modes, where I'm going to set the opacity and the flow jitter both to pen pressure. Now, your mouse does not have pressure, but what happens in this particular case is that as I loosen up on the stylus, the strokes will get lighter. So as you can see now, they start off soft and become harder as I press harder. All right, so now that I have that, I'm going to go in here and make the brush much smaller. And in a layer on top of this one, which I'm going to call darks. In darks, I will start to draw all the strokes that are going to make up the darker tones of that hair underneath. Now you can see I'm just going in there and just very loosely going in and starting to build up what this hair is going to look like. You might throw a couple more on the outside areas like so, just to start to build up this tone. Now, I'm going to pick up a color that's lighter than the brown. So I'm going to pick the brown itself. There's the brown that I had originally. I'm going to pick a much lighter version of it like that. And I'm going to create another layer, which I'll call midtones. I'm going to reduce the size of the brush again, and I'm going to start to go in there and start to stroke on top of that. So you can see where I'm starting to get lighter tones on top of that original hair right there like that. Then on top of that one, I will create one that's called highlights. And then I'm going to pick something that's really light. I'm going to go into my blondes and go way up into this light tone. Now here in this particular layer, I'm going to go very lightly. So I'm going to just very lightly go in there and start drawing a couple little highlights right through there like that. Now I'm going to switch to that brush that was less dense, this one here. Now I have to go in there and make the adjustments. So I'm going to go in there and in the brush tips, bring the spacing down to 0. Transfer modes, they remember what I had set before, so there they go. And then I'm going to go in here, make the size much smaller. And I'm going to start to go in there and just start to draw in little highlights in little spots. Now, I don't worry about those little extra things where I hit a little too hard. I can fix those later. I'm going to add a couple little highlights right through here and so on. Now, I do have an eraser, and this is a layer. So I can go in there and erase some of this stuff that I don't want down here. Now, I can take the eraser with one of these hair guys. I can do it there too. And sure enough, I go in there and make the same controls and set up the transfer modes. And I'm going to reduce the size and kind of sweep into those highlights just like that to kind of loosen them up. And I can even bring down the opacity of the eraser so it's not so strong. I just kind of light those up, just like that. Then I'll take my paintbrush and a single pixel brush, go way down, hard tip, single pixel. All right, and I'll pick up one of these dark tones from right there. And I go to my brush engine and bring the spacing down and the transfer modes. And with this one, I will then go in there and create the little hairs that are just kind of blowing in the wind, little loose ones here and there, and creating these little wisps along the sides, just like that. And I might even want to go in there and get my really bright one. And in the layer with the highlights, which I'm still there, I might go in there and just add a couple little streaks in a couple little spots where the light is just hitting this hair just right, creating these extra little highlights all through here like so. Oops, let's forget those last ones that we just saw there. Make believe they're not there. So there we see that we're just adding all these nice little highlights right along the edges here. And we can see that we have the hair. In the case of Jeff's beard, I used that single brush with a black. In that case, it was with a white, and I just drew all these loose hairs going in all different directions like that to create the scraggly beard that he has. But in the cases of soft hair, it looked just like that. And you can see the layers, the way they're broken down, it's the base, the darks, the midtones, and the highlights. Back to the one of my daughter here, we'll look at the actual layers for the hair. We'll come in closely, and we'll break down the hair here. Now, this top layer is the composite, where I've assembled all the different pieces. We'll just turn those off for now. And we'll start to look at these different hairs. Here's the hair base, which is just a dark tone on the bottom, which also has a few loose strands along the edges. There's the blacks on top of that, and you can see them build up. There's a layer called hair, which just brought in a couple of grays. Here's the light hairs on top of those. Here's the red sheens that she has on top of that. And then here's the light sheens on top of that. So here you can see the buildup of the individual layers that make up the hair that then becomes the final image that we see up here on top, where we've assembled it all together to get all the nice strands of hair in place, all following the flow and so on.